Hello, everyone. Welcome to the At Matters podcast, presented by the Outer Loop Theater Experience, where we create art that matters. I am Rachael Yoder, and I am the artistic director of the Outer Loop. And here on this podcast, we just create a space to explore the question, what are we here to do?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we
And
do.
yeah, I'm Melissa Wilson. I'm the marketing director and inner ENSO facilitator for the Outer Loop. And yeah, just really excited for this episode. But first, as always, we have a little game. I don't know
Mhm.
why, but in my brain I was like, we need a jingle for the game, but I don't
Oh,
know.
I like
Jingle or
that.
not.
Yes,
We'll
I think
figure
we
it out.
do. All right. On the to-do list, jingle for
On the
five
to-do
things.
list. Good. All right. Until the jingle comes, I'll give you my category. And that is, what are 5 things that people do that make you feel cared for?
Aw. Five things that people do that make me feel cared for. That's so nice. Okay, the first one that's coming to mind, like anytime that anyone cooks for me, I just think that's like so beautiful to like want to like feed and like nourish someone in some way. I do feel very cared for. Like my family in particular, like when I go home and I feel like my mom like make me food, I'm like, "Aw." Like, especially, like being like an adult and having to cook for myself all the time. It's like when somebody else like me is gonna do that for you, like, wow,
Yeah.
that's great. That makes me feel
Yes.
very cared for. Um, this is like kind of like sappy, but like Michael will sometimes like because he kind of like lives in the future and he like anticipates things that I don't even know. So like he'll sniff a need I have coming sometimes and like just do it for me, and it's like, oh,
Aw.
I didn't even know, like you saw that I was like running out of coffee and like I didn't say anything and you just got more because you knew that I wouldn't have any and I would be sad.
Hmm.
So that's definitely one.
Yes, that's
Anticipating
sweet.
of that. um when people like randomly check in on me, like it'll be somebody that I like haven't heard from in a really long time and they'll just like randomly be like, I was thinking about you, like, how you doing? Like that makes me feel very cared for. I love that. um I think, yeah, because quality time is my like love language, when people will just like sit with me and like just like have like a very long conversation and just like let it go, like as long as it needs to go, and like really dig into stuff and just like spend time with me in a way that feels meaningful. That makes me feel very cared for. Um and when people like when I'm in some sort of like a weird, like, I don't know, like feral animal mood and people just like are accepting of that and like are still willing to tolerate like being around me when I feel like a monster, that makes
Yes.
me feel very cared for.
Yes. Good.
Oh,
Aw,
good
those are
question.
sweet. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, mine is a little bit totally different than that, so
Great.
prepare for a hard left. What are 5 songs that you never want to listen to ever again?
Oh. Um, I think I could do without listening to, oh, for sure, Shape of You by Ed Sheeran. Um, it was just like it was like every week in my Zumba class, senior year of high school, we would dance to Shape of You by Ed Sheeran, and I already didn't really like it, and that just kind of pushed me over the edge a little bit. Um, okay, I love when people like who I'm face to face with will jokingly reference Country Road, Take Me Home, but I don't need to listen to like the recording. It's a meme song. Why would I listen to that? Uh, similarly, but on a totally different note, Baby Shark. This like recording that they've given Gen Alpha is terrifying. I know it's an annoying song, but it's like supposed to be an annoying camp song, but camp
Yeah.
songs are supposed to be sung by like a person in front of you, like with a guitar or something, just like being hokey, not like a very auto-tuned YouTube voice.
100% agree.
Um, ooh, what else? Okay, well, this is what's coming to my head, so I'm gonna say it, but I don't know if I totally agree. Um,
With yourself.
with myself. Okay, Sabrina Carpenter, she just came out with Please Please Please. I think it's her newest song still. Um and she's a very talented musician. It's actually like a really good song, but it is just something that I am not interested in having stuck in my head anymore.
Mm.
And so I would love it if it would stop being like the most viral sound on my TikTok feed. By the time this episode airs, people are gonna have forgotten about this song, but
Yeah.
it's been very relevant for me lately. um, a fifth song. Okay. This is Oceans, which is a worship song that was just a little bit too prevalent a long time ago, like when I was in middle school probably. But I it's a good song. It's actually like a really great song. But first off, it's like 8 minutes long.
Whoa.
And yeah. Um, secondly, I just even though it's such a good song, because it was so overplayed, now I can't hear it without laughing. Like I just can't take it seriously because it was again such a meme. Because everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, this song again." So I think we can just like totally take it out of circulation because no one can take it seriously anyways. So, yep,
Great.
those are my
Love
songs.
it. Love it.
Yes, good
Amazing.
question.
Well, I was trying to come at the topic of this episode in like a backwards way because
Yeah.
today we're talking about listening. So
Oh.
I wanted to play with things we don't want to listen to
Perfect.
in order to talk about the importance of listening. But no, that is what we wanted to make space for today because I think we've been finding through the process of this podcast just how frequently listening comes up and how important it is and how terrible we all are at it sometimes. And I know that we both have different perspectives on listening and opinions about it. So yeah, we just wanted to make space for that conversation. And also, you know, how it ties back to you mentioned in your episode where we talked through your life that listening is really linked to your purpose, your sense of purpose.
Mhm.
So because that's what we talk about here on this podcast, we wanted to get into that as well. So yeah, let's talk about listening. First of all, let's start with theater because that's what we do. That's what the company does. But I just saw a show at Steppenwolf, which was fantastic. I'm not sure if it's still going to be playing by the time this episode airs, but Little Bear Ridge Road with Laurie Metcalf is in it. So, like, first of all, it's obviously going to be amazing, but like, it truly was like one of the most incredible pieces of theater I've seen in a really long time. And I wept at the end of it. Like I haven't cried that hard at the end of a show in a long time. And like I saw it with my mom and she was like, yeah, I was like worried you were gonna like cross over into into like ugly cry, like stop, like uncontrollable. Like when you
Yeah,
lose control of the crying and it's like
totally.
you've gone to another place, like that's what that show did to me. But in watching that show, I was thinking a lot about the ways in which theater facilitates listening because as an audience member, inherently being an audience member to a piece of theater is like forced listening in a way. That's your whole job. It's just you're sitting, it's dark, like it's very much like a private experience and you're on your own, like just receiving, just listening, just receiving this story, just receiving what's going on with the, in between people, receiving what's going on like with maybe one actor at a time. And just like that's what it is. And we are so rarely in that in that space, that sort of like forced receptive space. And it's not like, it's different from, watching TV on the couch, like where you're kind of on your phone and you're kind of half listening and you're maybe checking in every once in a while. Like, nope, like turn the phone off. You are here to listen and just receive somebody else's experience. And it is so, it can be so moving and so healing to be in that process of listening. And I think that's part of the power of theater, is it puts us in that space. It's a very unique space that we're put in when we're receiving a piece of theater, and it is a listening space. And like what happened to me in this show, it was just so moving to receive this experience. Has nothing to do with me. I'm not like really have nothing. I'm not like a gay man in Idaho, and like that's not my life experience, but like, man, did that thing wreck me. um Even when you're not seeing yourself on stage, to receive somebody else's story and to really deeply listen through your heart is a profound experience. So um yeah, that was kind of like, it was like, why does theater, facilitate listening so much? And that was kind of my experience with that. Have you, is that my, am I the only one?
No, definitely not the only one. I think I I know, and I'm sure that I've had some of those experiences watching theater. None are coming to mind, but I think what is coming to mind is like doing theater and having similar experiences. I think almost from like a different side, but like when you're watching theater, it is such a sweet thing because you're kind of forced. I mean, it'd be really hard to not listen, right? There's not really any distractions. It's the thing that's in front of you. You're either asleep or you're listening. um but on stage, listening is just as important, and yet there are like a
Mm.
bajillion other things that you could be thinking about, like, because you have your lines memorized, pretty much exactly what's going to happen every step of the way. It's really easy to just like check out, be like, okay, especially if it's a more involved play or it's a musical or something where you're just like, okay, I need to make sure that I'm, hit my mark at the start of this dance or whatever. Or you're singing while you're dancing and you're like, I could be only thinking about these moves right now and not about the words coming out of my mouth. But especially about the words coming out of the other person's mouth, because it's so hard to make words that someone else wrote initially feel like a genuine response that's
Mm-hmm.
coming out of your mind right at that moment, that it's like you realize that these are the words for you to say right as you say them, even
Mm-hmm.
though that's not what's happening because you've had these words memorized for the last 2 months after some person wrote them 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
um and that takes like listening in such
Yeah.
an interesting way. And so I think it's really cool that you started with that audience perspective, because it's like, as much as the audience has to be listening, the characters have to be listening to each other for it to be a conversation worth listening to from an audience perspective.
100%. And I think that's a lot of like a lot of people who, maybe theater is not their entire existence. And so they don't always know why some performances you feel so drawn to and some plays feel so alive and so like affect you so much and some of them don't. And I think it's exactly what you just said, is when the actors are listening to each other and really deeply affecting each other. And it's, yes, okay, we've got the lines on the page and those are all going to come out. But if you're really listening to the other person, they're going to do something a little bit different than the night before. And it's going to affect you a little bit differently. And then you're going to say the thing back a little bit and with maybe a little bit of a different intention. And it's going to volley back differently. And you're changing each other. And it's not just, oh, it's the same way it always is. And that's something that does differentiate theater from, say film and television, is that it's all happening live on stage and it's coming out different every time. And like a lot of times, film and TV is like, maybe my partner's not even there for my coverage and I'm just given an eye line of looking at, the wall, and I'm trying to imagine that I'm being affected differently. But like the listening that has to happen on stage is so much more elevated and needs to happen so much more viscerally and deeply. And watching that is magnetic. It's electrifying to watch people really be listening and affected by each other, and like the aliveness that happens between people. And we can feel it. We know when it's not happening. Whether you can name it or not, it's like, oh yeah, they weren't listening to each other because she just said that this way, but he just responded in a way that means he didn't really take that in. It was just how he had already planned to respond. So
Mhm.
it is the craft of theater in many ways is a listening craft. Which I don't know if are you exposed to Meisner training at all as part of your background?
Mm-mm.
I think you would really dig it. I wasn't until I hit grad school, and then that's when I had my first exposure to it. But it really is about, it's like listening training, because the core exercise of Meisner is repetition. And so the point is that, you're just repeating the same thing. You start with just repeating the same thing back and forth. And it's just like you are wearing a black shirt. It's just a true thing that you're repeating back and forth. But you do it for like 15 minutes. And what starts to happen is that you get underneath the words. Like the words don't matter anymore, but you're feeling something different underneath them as it evolves. And then you just respond to that thing. But all you have to say is the same text. And it's just like, you're wearing a black shirt, you realize through that exercise can come to mean so many different things. And
Mhm.
you have to respond to all of those different things your partner is giving you. So the same thing is true then where Meisner training goes, is that the same thing is true with everything that we say. There's a million different ways and things that it can mean. And if you're really listening and being affected by what's underneath the text, that's where the magic starts to happen. That's where it like really starts to crackle. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. So highly recommend Meisner. But here's the thing. I wish that everyone had access to listening training in some way, because I do see, and I'm because of probably my background in in Meisner and also in theater, like I feel allergic to when people are not listening to each other. And particularly, there's nothing that grinds my gears more than when I feel I'm not being listened to. It shuts me down so fast. Like I just want to walk away from the conversation. Like I'm just like, oh, you're not listening. Like I need to get away from
Yeah.
you because it's the worst thing ever. But I feel like we place so much emphasis on communication, the communication side of things, and not enough emphasis on the listening side of things. And I feel like it's, I don't know. I imagine that I know that education has changed since I was in school, but I felt like there was way more focus on, communication skills than there were on listening skills. I don't know if that's been your experience as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I don't know that I thought of it in those terms, but I think that's totally true. It's bringing to mind a book that uh I listened to it on audiobook actually. But it's called Quiet. I wrote it down. Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by
Mm.
Susan Cain. And this is a book that my mom had recommended to me back in high school. I think my mom is like incredibly delightful introvert, and I love to talk her ear off because she's great at listening. um, but what it talked about was this concept of active listening, being that you're not just like, you know, there's a difference between listening because it's the only thing you can really do because someone's talking at you, and like making it an active thing to intake the information that they're giving you. And I think that so much of that is giving up control of the conversation, which is so hard. Like, as you were talking just now, like, I was trying to actively listen to you, and yet there are a million things going through my head of like, oh, we could talk about this, we could talk about that, I should bring up this next. You know what I mean? And then we end up with these like oddly stilted conversations because you finish what you're saying and I start talking about something that you said halfway through what, your paragraph that you gave or whatever, because I I didn't finish listening. I caught on to something that I wanted to talk about and just
Mm.
I stopped listening because I wanted to take control of the conversation. And and it's hard to give up that control, but I think learning about that concept of active listening has helped me so much as an actor, but mostly as a person to start to work on, okay, what does it look like to think of listening as the most powerful thing instead of communication and controlling the conversation and having this go the way I want it to or I think is interesting or whatever. Um, that's yeah, having that no longer be the most important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you yeah. So I just did the thing that you, because like I picked up, there was like a million things that you said in there that I
Right.
was like, I want to start to, but that is, I think it's a Stephen Covey quote that I come back to all the time, and because it's so true of most people, is that most people do not listen with the intent to understand. Most people listen with the intent to reply. And it's that is the thing that's going on in our heads when other people are talking. It's like, oh, I can't wait to say the thing that I'm going to say next. Is like, we're not listening to understand, we're listening to reply. I we talked about this before, but I've done a lot of work facilitating leadership development programs with a lot of corporate clients, and moving through the content, there's listening content, there's communication content, and we were spending a lot of time on communication content, and then we started to realize that it was like, actually we have to spend a lot more time on the listening content and way less time on the communication content, because people have no idea how to listen. And so digging into that, just like research on listening and learning more about listening, I learned that there's 5 levels of listening. And so it's yeah, I know. It's so the first level is like ignoring, which is like, how is that a level of listening? But it's like, the expectation is that we're supposed to be listening. Like, we're in the room and someone is talking at us, but like, we're probably looks a little bit like, something else going
Right.
on, you're distracted with something else, and like, you're not listening. And then there's so you move from ignore to pretend. Then there's pretend listening, which like we all know what that looks like. That's you're yeah, yeah, but it's like,
Right.
and a lot of times that passes for listening. And so then like we move to selective listening, which is different. The definition of that is different from what I thought. So it's like, you're listening to understand up until the point that the other person says something you disagree with. So you're listening to understand, and you're in listening to understand. You're like, oh, yes. Ah, yes. You're so smart because you agree with me. And then they say something. You're like, oh, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. That's a switching point. And then you move into listening to reply. And then it's, I cannot wait for you to shut up. And then I'm going to tell you how stupid you are, how stupid I think you are. So that's selective listening. And then you move into attentive listening, which is like, you're getting all the information, all the facts, it's like, okay, I have received the information that you shared, but you're missing the underlying like emotional content. So like, in a workplace example, so maybe I come to you and I'm like, um, Melissa, like I know we're really busy, but like I was just hoping that like maybe I could have like a couple days off next week. Like, do you think that'd be okay? And if you were attentively listening, you'd be like, you want a few days off? No problem. Okay, bye. Like, but you would miss that there's
Right.
something else going on there.
Right.
There's like a little bit more to the story. And then it's not until the 5th level of listening, which is empathetic listening, where you're actually fully listening to understand and like getting all of that emotional, you're getting the full context of where that person is at. And through my own process of learning about that there's even 5 levels, I realize how much time I spend in the lower levels when I think I'm listening, but I'm actually doing all of those other things. And then trying to, even knowing about it, trying to discipline myself to actually be an empathetic listening most of the time is incredibly difficult. And I catch myself doing it all the time. All the time I'm distracted. All the time I'm like, I'm doing 5 different other things. And like, someone is needing my listening and I'm not giving it to them. So it's, there's a lot in the way, but we're all like, man, we are bad at it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, the selective listening, that was the third one. Yeah, that's something that I have like I didn't have terminology for it, but been trying to work on over the last, I don't know, year, 6 months, because as I've been like, you know, just like who I am as a person continues to transition and these sorts of things, and I'm realizing more fully certain like biases that I have, that yeah, when I'm in certain conversations, I'm like in anticipating that someone's going to say something that I think is wrong. And so like it not only is it that where it's like yeah, yeah, yeah until it's no, but it's also like even when I'm in the yeah stage, I'm kind of assuming the worst of this
Mm.
conversation or this person, and like waiting for them to like trip up or something like
Ha.
that,
Mhm.
to like say something wrong so that I can get them because I know that they have this opinion that is wrong or whatever.
Mhm.
And it's yeah, so having that terminology is super helpful because it's so, you're right, it is so prevalent.
The thing about the switching point is that it's visceral. Like we feel it. We know when we it's like it's a gut feeling. It's that secret like, that's the thing I disagree with. I can't wait to what? And then all we're doing is listening to reply. I'm coming up with my whole argument, and like I am no longer listening to anything you're saying because my whole brain power is spent on like coming up with the thing that I'm going to say to tell you how wrong that you are. And yeah, like you said, sometimes it's like you anticipate the switching point. It's like, well, I agree with you right now, but I think in a minute you're going to disagree, and I got to be prepared with the thing that I'm going to say. Um, and the antidote to that is truly to get in the practice of listening to understand. So you've got a choice, right? When you feel that feeling of like, I disagree, your choice is I can either listen to reply and come up with my argument, or I can continue to listen to understand. And what that takes is a willingness to listen with curiosity. It's like if you can move from a place of like, oh, that's wrong, to, huh, that is so interesting that they feel. I completely disagree with that. I couldn't be farther from that opinion. I wonder why that person feels that way. I wonder what life experience that person has had that makes him feel that way. And to lean into that and to go to what, and like, the I think where people get caught is like, oh no, no, then I'll have to agree with them. Nope, you don't have to agree with them. You don't have to agree with them. You just can start with, that's really interesting that you feel that way, Melissa. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you feel that way? I feel completely differently about that. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you feel the way that you feel? And that's the conversation I think we're often so unwilling to have.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that takes, and I think you touched on this in our last episode about the empathy project, but like distancing those conversations. I think so frequently I get defensive because I feel like when someone says something that I don't agree with, it's a personal attack to me. And so I feel like, oh, if you believe this, this means that you don't whatever trust me or think I'm a good person or whatever. And so I have to defend myself. It's not even
Mm-hmm.
just this opinion, but if we can come to a place where we're able to intake opposing opinions without it feeling like a personal attack, and then also be able to yeah, ask for that clarification and say that we disagree without attacking the other person. Because I think so frequently when it's like what you said, it's like, hey, I disagree, like tell me more about that. Frequently that coming out of my mouth, that does not come out in that tone of voice, you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I think what's hard about that is like we all want to feel listened to. We all want to feel understood. And that is like the drive, everyone's driving need. And we're all walking around with, because people don't really take the time to listen. We're all walking around with like, nobody's listening to me, you know? And so the second that we got somebody and then we feel like, you know, they're not listening to understand, they're just listening to reply, then we're like, oh, they're not listening, so I'm not listening, and then nobody's listening. So I think what that takes, like, in order for us to get to the point where somebody is listening to us to understand us, sometimes we have to be willing to ante up first and to be the first person who's like, all right, I feel really differently about that. And I would love for them to understand my perspective. In order for us to get to the place where they are going to listen to my perspective, I have to first listen to understand their perspective. And I think that is where it breaks down most of the time is like, we're not ready to ante up first. So it's like, okay, I want to get to the place where I feel understood, but let's start with me understanding them. Let's start there. And then, okay, I'm curious about that. Tell me a little bit more about that. And then once that person feels that you have fully listened to understand through the whole thing that they have to say, then you can say, wow, so can I tell you about where I come from and how I see that a little bit differently? And then they're going to be like, yeah, you know, like
Right.
versus if you just jumped right in at the first thing that you disagreed with and start to tell them why they're wrong and where you're coming from, they don't want to listen because you didn't listen to them. But it's really hard to want to make the first move, especially, which I think you touched on a little bit, is like, this is all fine and dandy if we're talking about, you know, I like chocolate, you like vanilla. No problem. I'm happy to tell me why. Tell me why you like chocolate. Like, I have no problem listening to that. Where it gets really tricky is when it's that value level stuff, when it's like, no, this is not that thing. Like, other things we can disagree about, but that's like part of my core self. And like you were saying, you know, that's where defensiveness comes up. That's where it's like, we just put up walls. It's like, no, I'm not even willing to listen to that. And that's where I think like the pitch of the conversation is around us right now, which is why listening to understand is more important than ever, and also why it's more impossible than ever to engage around, because it's not just politics anymore, because we've moved past like an old version of politics where I think we were discussing, you know, differences between policies, and the differences between things where it felt a little bit more nuanced, they felt a little bit different. Now it feels like we're not talking about politics. We're talking about right and wrong, you know, and we're talking about like at my core level, what do I believe is right and what do I believe is wrong? Like that's the debate that we're having. So it's hotter than ever, it's angrier than ever, and it's harder than ever to engage with the opposing point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this is where some of it then does come back to communication as well. It's like, because they really have to be held hand in hand, because with communication, it's like, okay, I can work on my listening. I can work on, yeah, asking those explore questions in, without trying to make assumptions, in encouraging tones of voice. But also, like, as I'm sharing, I can do my best to, as I'm talking about a right and wrong that I feel strongly about, to also not be like, well, and I'm so glad that I'm not part of this other community who's
Mm.
idiotic and thinks this other thing because they just don't know anything. It's like, I think that often is also so much part of our communication. And it's like, well, then that was a personal attack. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not just something that I feel is a personal attack as I listen. Like, no, that was a personal attack, whether that
Mm-hmm.
was consciously what went through your brain before you said that or not. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, yeah, working to listen better, but also working to communicate in a way that is encouraging those sorts of respectful conversations and listening sessions.
No, you're right. That is an important part of it. And I think that you know, the skill there is like we always want to say to people like, oh, you know, don't take it personally. It's like, well, the best way for people to not take things personally is if you don't make it personal. And
Yeah.
sometimes in the way that we communicate, we do make things personal versus keeping it on, you know, what is the data here that we're discussing and not the, you know, the person. Like, what is the idea? Let's keep it on the specifics versus like, you know, the generalizations or, you know, like name calling or any kind of like easy blaming language, labeling, all of that. So you're right. There is communication skill. And I also think emotional intelligence. And certainly the competency that I struggle with the most, which is self-management. Like you have to be able to feel the feeling, feel the, oh, a big anger. I feel a big anger, and like be able to be like, okay, like let's not act on that. Let's give ourselves some space between the stimulus and response here. Give it a second, like manage the emotion, find the respectful way to communicate back and communicate from that place. Then you're much more likely to get good listening back and to have a dialogue that's helpful. I so often am like, oh, no. And I think it maybe has to do with acting a little bit, because on stage, what we want is just stimulus response, like react right from the emotion. So I'm always like, I feel like I'm always like ready to go. Like, oh, I feel a thing. Time to say the thing. Is like, no, actually, that's not the most helpful way to communicate out in the world. You have to space between the big feeling and how it comes out of your mouth, in order to have the highest chance of successful communication.
Yes. Yes. Wow. I think I could talk forever about this, which is ironic because I'm supposed to not be talking. I'm supposed to be listening. Um, but I feel like that's maybe a good place to wrap up for this week. And just yeah, just have us all be thinking about listening maybe a little more. A little more this week. Yeah.
Yeah, if everyone could spend some time reflecting on, maybe how often you actually listen to understand, versus when you're listening to reply, and just like a little bit of a heightened awareness around, oh, hey, like even if you don't even change it, just like, oh, hey, I'm formulating my response in my head, and I'm not listening with curiosity. Just as a practice, just to see how it goes.
Yeah. A little
Just to notice.
self-awareness. Yeah.
Yes, just a little self-awareness. Love it. Amazing. Well, thank you all for listening. I'm sure, to be continued. This topic never ends. So I'm sure we'll pick up the thread of this in future episodes.
Yeah, but feel free to listen to any past or future episodes. We'll be here every Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts, and follow along on social media to make sure you don't miss anything.
Indeed. And so our call to action for you this week is just for you to think about, when has someone really listened to you? Just think of a time where you felt really deeply listened to, and how did that make you feel? So think about that. You can email us some of those answers to that questions at podcast@outerlooptheater.org. We would love to hear from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for listening, friends.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye. Bye.